From the Warhammer Imperium magazine, collected short stories narrated by J.H. Miniatures. At the request of Inquisitor Draxos, war in the Scrap Heap. Thought of the day. We are the sons and daughters of Krieg. We shall never retreat. We shall fight, and we will die. The Death Corps of Krieg are experts at fighting in inhospitable environments, including polluted orc manufacturing facilities. On the surface of Fendatha, a Death Corps of Krieg kill team attempts to sabotage an orc facility and disrupt the Greenskins' war effort in the Octarius sector. Their presence has not gone unnoticed, however. Orc commandos hunt the human soldiers across the Scrap City's rusted walkways. Advancement through the Orc facility had thus far progressed without incident. Sergeant Loverick doubted this would remain the case for long. At his side, the squad's demolition specialist, Vatner, checked his melter bombs nervously. Loverick could see the Orcs' furnaces ahead, their teetering chimneys belching toxic fumes into the dawn sky. Soon Vatner's expertise would be required. A suspended walkway led from the squad's position, disappearing into the miasma of ash and smoke that surrounded the Orc production facility, the perfect site for an ambush. Loverick swallowed hard. He had a bad feeling about this op, but he had his orders. Form up. Dargan, take point. Svetla, Calder, cover the rear. The rest of you, fan out. Heads on a swivel, soldiers. We're about to enter the Ambul's den. Loverick whispered across the squad's Vox channel, checking his las pistol for charge. Dargan, the newest member of the squad, took up his lasgun, rose to his feet and took a nervous step forward. He had taken no more than a dozen steps before his form began to fade from sight, consumed by clouds of polluting fumes. The rest of the squad began to file in behind the point man, moving steadily across the uneven, unsteady walkway. Loverick waved Vatner forwards, and with a wary glance ahead, followed the demolition specialist across the narrow passageway, wincing every time the metal creaked beneath his feet. Svetla and Calder watched him pass, guns trained towards the rear. As the squad pressed further into the smog clouds, visibility reduced so severely that Loverick could barely see more than a few feet in any direction. Ahead, Vatner's silhouette drifted in and out of the haze. The walkway opened out into an expanse covered in discarded scrap metal and fractured remains of vehicles. The sounds of Orc industry were louder now, a cacophony of grinding machinery that made even the squad's Vox channel almost impossible to hear. Loverick followed Vatner's barely visible form through the detritus, avoiding rusted holes in the floor and stepping around jagged chunks of metal. As he negotiated a barricade wrapped in rusted barbed wire, a shot rang out from the darkness. No more than 10 paces ahead, Vatner stumbled backwards, a spray of blood emerging from the back of his trench coat as he fell, helmet slamming into the steel floor. For a second, Loverick stood transfixed, watching Vatner's blood pool around his body. Only Svetla's cry shook the sergeant from his panicked state. "Greenskin ambush! Return fire!" she bellowed, her cries drowned beneath a hail of Orc gunfire. "I'm hit!" exclaimed Dargan, his voice thick with pain and shock. Loverick drew his las pistol and whirled around to see the muscular form of a greenskin emerging from the shadows. Clad all in black, the assailant clutched a pistol in one colossal fist and a massive crude axe in the other. The Orc's face was obscured by a pair of goggles, the lenses of which glowed bright green. It snarled as it leapt towards him, spittle flying from a maw filled with broken teeth. Loverick levelled the pistol and fired once. A bolt of red light shot from the barrel of his gun and pierced the right lens of the foe's goggles, burning a neat hole through the beast's skull. It stumbled forwards, propelled by its own momentum. The sergeant stood aside as the greenskin crashed to the floor, still twitching in its death throes. There was no time to celebrate the kill. More of the creatures pressed forwards, emerging from the shadows to strike with cruel daggers. Unlike the Orcs he had encountered before, these creatures did not bellow nor scream in barely contained rage as they struck, but remained eerily silent, picking off their targets with discipline and precision uncharacteristic of their race. Loverick's soldiers were sons and daughters of Krieg, however. They would not retreat, even in the face of certain death. Loverick reached down and grabbed Vatner's trench coat, dragging the dead soldier's body to cover as he worked to retrieve the devices. A barrage of heavy slugs peppered the ground around him. More camouflaged Orcs had begun taking positions above and had begun firing in his direction. Glancing to one side, Lovric's eyes came to rest upon the Orc power unit, its smoke-blackened mass covered with crude iconography and blasphemous green-skinned scrawlings. He reached for his Vox unit and yelled above the din of combat. "I'll set the charges! Cover me!" he exclaimed, drawing his power sword from its scabbard and activating the power switch. A volley of las fire rang out from the shadows, distracting the Orcs and forcing them into cover. Making use of the distraction, Lovric rose from his hiding place and dashed towards the generator. Two more bulky Orcs moved to block his path, only to be peppered with a hail of lasgun fire. One fell under the barrage, weapons falling from lifeless hands as it crashed to the floor. The remaining foe weathered the storm, moving to block Lovric's path and swinging at him with its crude weapons. The foe had the advantage of size and strength, yet Lovric hurled himself forwards regardless. Ducking under a sweeping cleaver, he thrust the tip of his power sword into the Orc's flank. It grunted in surprise as the weapon pierced its flesh, and lashed out with a meaty hand, striking Lovric in the side of the head. The force of the blow knocked him from his feet. He came to rest at the foot of the generator, vision blurred, blood trickling down the inside of his gas mask. The melter charges he had been carrying rolled free, coming to rest at the base of the generator. Lovric dragged himself forwards, fingers grasping desperately for the explosive devices. The cries of his soldiers echoed across his Vox receiver as they were cut down by the Orcs. As he reached for the bombs, a heavy boot descended, pinning him in place, and he heard a rough, gravelly voice bark in his ear. "I don't think so, Umi." And there you go. So that is the story tie-in, or at least in this magazine, to the Kill Team box set, Octarius, or whatever it was called. It's been that long. It's been about a year, hasn't it? It's quite interesting to have a story where, the humans don't just win. It's quite interesting to actually see like the Orcs get the upper hand on this conflict. I think it would be quite interesting to then continue the story from the Orc perspective, almost as if this was like the initial kind of sting to then get you interested from that perspective. Like it then goes on to follow, I don't know, Blood Axe Commando, Nazdreg Gut Stabber or something, right? And then it's his perspective for a chapter or two. I think that would be quite good. I think that again, it's like I've said before. Like it's the good stories do make you sort of want more. The bad ones, make you happy that it's all over and you don't have to read it anymore. The difficulty comes in the fact that ultimately not all of these stories are made equal. Some of them are just absolutely dire. Some of them are just so dreadful. And this one's in the middle ground. It's nothing. It's nothing really to write home about. I think had it continued into another chapter, it would need. This is the thing with these stories. As good as they are, they desperately need the conversations. I mean, I'm just flicking ahead to like stories 28, right? So story 28 is called Green Hell, and it's 1, 2, 3. Oh, hello, it's a long one. Green Hell. Right, and if we just skip ahead, right? All around the melee, Orcs going forwards, blah blah blah. Vox report our positions. Leapt to the second orc. Like it's all combat based. It is all fighting and killing and stabbing and screaming, and that's fine. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. And I think it might even be worth, I might genuinely like dig out some of my favourite sort of 40k books or stories from the past and just give them a read, because the best parts of the lore of this game aren't just the killing and slaughter, because after a while it blurs together. After a while you could replace Space Marine, Death Corps of Krieg, Commando, whatever. You could replace it with anything and just replace the names of the weapons and you'd get pretty much the same feeling. But the reality is, there's more to this game than just killing and slaughter, even though it's, in the dark future of the 41st millennium there is only war. It's a real sort of double-edged sword, as the saying goes. No, it's a real duality. It's a real duality to the system, where a lot of the interesting stuff that actually gets people into the game is the conversations between factions. But I don't know. That's been story number 11. We are now a third of the way through because again this stops at story, I want to say 31 off the top of my head. Yeah, story 31, Converging Fates. That's the last one in the actual book, in the book, in the magazine series. So we'll see how it is when we get there. That was story number 11, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you and goodbye.